Hello and welcome to the Earthkeepers podcast. This podcast is for people who seek new and better ways to love and care for the earth. It's a podcast for anyone who is deeply concerned about the harm being done to the environment on a local and global level. It's a podcast that builds community and connection between people of like heart and mind. People who believe that earth care should be integrated into every aspect of life. And for many in the Earthkeepers community, that includes our spiritual practices. My name is Forrest Inslee, and today I'll be talking to Lenore Three Stars. Lenore is a member of the board for Circlewood, and Circlewood, as you may know, is the larger creation care community to which Earthkeepers belongs. In many ways, Lenore has had a shaping influence on the priorities and values of this podcast. In particular, as a member of the Lakota people, she has helped us to understand and embrace elements of an Indigenous worldview. In his book, One Church, ManyTribes, Richard Twiss wrote, "Native Americans see themselves as part of the whole creation. They have long perceived and pursued a balanced relationship between man and the environment, a partnership of equality and respect." It is this balanced relationship that Lenore helps us to understand.
When you look at creation, it is totally marginalized. Everything is suffering in creation. And those are our relatives. We are related to everything in creation, non-human creation. We're related to the plant nation and the buffalo nation, the water nations, the winged nations. We're related to all of those. We have a duty to, again, be the caretakers, to be the co-sustainers. And we can see all around us that is not happening.
Welcome, friends, to the Earthkeepers podcast.
My name is Lenore Three Stars. Wichachbiamini Amachiapi. That's in Lakota. So when people hear Three Stars, they generally know that I'm Native American. In this side of the United States, it's pretty unusual to have such a descriptive surname, but where I come from, everybody has that kind of a name, so it's not unusual. They don't question whether really, are you a business or is that your real name? They automatically know I must be Lakota. My grandmother's real name, her surname in Lakota was Red Horse. So those things are accepted, but Three Stars is the anglicized version of the story that was told to the Indian agent. So I'm Oglala Lakota, which is one of the 7 bands of Lakota that make up the Ocheti Shikongwe, which is the 7 council fires. In school, you learn it as the Great Sioux Nation. I was born on Pine Ridge Reservation, where my dad was born, Peter, and my mother was born on Cheyenne River Reservation. She's Minnekoju Lakota. Our ancestral lands include the Black Hills, so that is my connection to land, which people would know once they know that you're Lakota, then you're from Hesapa, the Black Hills. And that is where our creation story lives. When I introduce myself properly, I think in terms of kinship, because in Lakota culture, kinship is everything. That's the foundation for our society. Tioshbaye is the extended family system.
So one of the things that you tend to teach people quite a lot about is their relationship to creation. And I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about people that have shaped your understanding of creation. Richard Twiss has been a big influence on my understanding of creation. And he has taught me a lot through his books, but also through conversation. And I understand that you also have a connection to his life, to his teachings, his wisdom. And maybe you could explain or describe a bit of his influence on your way of thinking and being.
I didn't know him well. I only met him through happenstance. But Richard was Lakota. His reservation is right next door to Rosebud. It's right next door to Pine Ridge. So as such, he also had the same philosophy of life, the Lakota philosophy of Mitakuye Oyasi, which means we are all related. And that philosophy says that we are related to each other and to Creator and to all of creation. At a point in my life when I realized that Christianity was not a good fit for me, this religion, I didn't have a home in it for my identity as a Native. I pretty much had to check my Native identity at the door, or else I would be accused of syncretism. If you call anything in Native culture sacred, then you're straying outside those lines that say only Jesus can be sacred. So Native dances, Native traditions, even an eagle feather can't be sacred. So you accept all of those things, all that propositional truth, but it catches up to you. And it was inevitable that one day I would want to follow Jesus as a Lakota woman. And so I met Richard at a time when he had just been part of this effort to get accreditation for this North American Institute of Indigenous Theological Studies. They got accredited for a master's program through George Fox. And I was part of that first cohort. Randy Woodley got me into that first class. So in 1 week, I retired from my job, moved my household across the state, got in a plane and went to the first symposium for this program. And it pretty much gave my faith life again. I found out that much of my theological confusion, the cultural misunderstandings, the real dying part of my faith was all because mostly it was because of a difference in worldview, the difference between a Western worldview and an Indigenous worldview. Even though I hadn't grown up on the reservation, I still had two Lakota parents, and so we had different understandings.
I would say that for many Native people I've talked to, they credit Richard with helping them to find the kind of freedom, the kind of way forward that you're talking about. What would you say is the core of his message?
I once heard him speak at a justice conference, and it was a room full of white people, and I had just met him, and he got out there and he said that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was white. And I practically held my breath, and everybody laughed. And so I thought, okay, they didn't run him out of town, I guess. But Richard could get away with stuff like that,
Absolutely.
It was funny and true, which is what I was learning. So when I think how I started to mesh my Western framework in terms of Christianity with Indigenous and Indigenous worldview, then I could see that there is a place. In fact, I could see cultural gospel values in like the Mitakuye Oyansi, which says that we are all related. Now, the Bible says one way where we're all related, through Abraham, all families will be blessed through him. And in Lakota, if you're not already related by bloodline or marriage, you can make relationships and family relationships. And so through Hunka, and those adoptive relationships are just as strong, if not stronger, than the original family relationships. So the idea of Mitakuye Oyansi is be the best relative you can be. So that means if things fall out of right relationship between you and Creator, between you and other people, between you and creation, then it's on you to find a way to bring that back into right relationship. Since Native spirituality is often more tangible, then that would involve ceremony and prayer and discerning what is the thing that you should be doing, which could be personally sacrificial, to bring things back into balance. Now that, to me, that's what Jesus asked us to do. That's what he taught all the time when he spoke into community.
Interesting that you cited that experience of hearing Richard speak to a group of predominantly white folks. I agree that he can get away with that. And in fact, people were anxious, were eager to hear the message that he had. I don't think it was all people, but it was people who understood that he had something to say that maybe corrected an imbalance of understanding. Richard himself would say that the church as a whole, the mainstream church, is incomplete without the corrective voice from Native people. And I'm wondering if you agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, once you stop seeing Native communities as a mission field and see us as co-laborers in trying to bring right relationship back into our communities, I see that Jesus died for that. He brought us his perfect model of love in terms of relationship with everybody. I see as a Lakota way of trying to restore what is broken, especially today when you look at creation, is totally marginalized. Everything is suffering in creation. And those are our relatives. We are related to everything in creation, non-human creation. We're related to the plant nation and the buffalo nation, the water nations, the winged nations. We're related to all of those. We have a duty to, again, be the caretakers, to be the co-sustainers. And we can see all around us that is not happening.
And when you say that, I'm not sure if you have a sense of how radical that is, or how radical and disturbing that might sound to people who are outside of that tradition, outside of that sensibility of kinship. Mm-hmm. For example, I think the way that the Christian creation story has been spun is that people are meant primarily to be caretakers and stewards, but in the sense that we stand apart from creation, we act on creation, and we use the earth in ways that ultimately should benefit people. And that is not a kinship mentality. That's not an understanding of us being part of creation. I'm wondering if you could help listeners to understand how to get their heads around that idea and how to think differently, or at least entertain the possibility of a different sort of relationship to creation.
Well, I know that Genesis is often exegeted to show man as the pinnacle of creation, free to use the earth as a resource colony, as a commodity. But don't we see now how unsustainable and destructive that worldview is? I think of the Bible story of Adam naming the animals. That was not from a sense of ownership from a Native perspective. That was in the context of relationship that he was doing that, because he was in charge of taking care of that area, his area of creation. So I think that what we learn in Sunday school, that for God so loved the world, I think we tend to just say that's just humans. But I don't think that's just humans. I think that all parts of creation need each other to live in balance. When God created all creation, he looked on it, all of it, in its entirety, and declared it profoundly good. And in Genesis, he told Noah, I'm setting up my covenant with you and your children and everything that came out of that ark, the animals. And the rainbow, he said, is the sign of the covenant that I've set up between me and everything living on earth. Even in Romans 8, we're told that all creation is in need of liberation and restoration, and that creation itself is groaning and longing for that same redemption that the children of God are waiting for. So I don't think that Jesus gave himself as a ransom for just humans. I think that he is including the creative world, and that Jesus died for all creation, that all creation could have that same healing, that restoration that Christianity calls salvation.
That inclusive view of creation, I think, does stand against more conventional Western ways of understanding it. And I'm wondering why you think that is. Where did it come from, this alternative story that, in fact, privileges the rights of people over all of the rest of creation, that keeps them divided in that really power differential relationship?
Yeah, I know that my Christian framework, I was formed in that same Western worldview with my Christian training. But I know that I should be saying that it's sin, that the devil made us do it. I don't believe in that, though. I think that we all have the capacity to create and to destroy. And so why that choice was made, I couldn't tell you, but I know that it is our responsibility as relatives to try and do everything we can to be the best relative we can. If we see where creation is suffering, then we should take a step to try and bring that back into balance. For some people, it means that you no longer, that you divest from banking agencies that promote pipelines. You saw the water protectors at Standing Rock willing to give their lives because they understand that water is our relative, that we are part of the land. I mean, even the Bible says that Adam was created from the land. So we are all related. We're all part of that, of creation. And I don't understand why we set ourselves apart from that to our own detriment. Because what we're doing to the land, we're doing in the water and the air, we're doing to ourselves. Wendell Berry said that there are no unsacred places. There's only sacred and desecrated. And we are in a state of ongoing desecration. We need to step up and do something about that. And if it's just the way you're thinking about creation, that is a wonderful start.
You, I know in some of your talks, tend to challenge mainstream ways of thinking by pointing out the dualism that locks people into seeing the world only in certain ways and blinds them to other ways of seeing. Could you help us understand a bit about that?
Well, that was one of the things that didn't feel right to me when I was learning about Christianity, was that this world is not our home. We're only passing through it. Well, that devalues the sacredness of creation. It kind of relieves you from any responsibility to take care of it. So I think that Gnostic dualism that separates the material and the spiritual worlds, that doesn't work with the holistic integrated worldview of the Indigenous people. One of the dualisms that I had to deal with had to do with the secular and the sacred, where nothing could be sacred except for Jesus. And ultimately what that meant was that if I said anything in my native culture was sacred, like even the eagle feather, there's a whole ceremony during a dance that if an eagle feather drops, they do a ceremony to restore it. And I couldn't talk about that or express anything about that. I had a hard time even understanding it when I knew that I couldn't consider anything sacred besides Jesus. So that is like a real dualism that it doesn't teach you everything that you need to know. It tells me that my Indian culture, there's something wrong with that, which means, of course, that there's something wrong with me being Indian. So the church became one more place like school where you had to learn not to be too Indian. But then you go home and you've got that dissonance of like, be proud that you are Lakota. You know? And so how do you carry both those things? Well, I was glad that I was able to go to this master's program, you know, and I was already retiring from school, from work. So that's a long time to wait to find out what the language is, what the thinking is around how you can follow Jesus and still be Indian, how you can do it in a good way, understand how your ancestors thought about creation and still follow Jesus. And I think they had a much clearer understanding than what we're trying to teach people today.
One of the core values of the Earthkeepers podcast is teachability. The Earthkeepers community is made up of people who know that they don't know, who understand that, especially in matters pertaining to right relationship with creation, our understanding is incomplete. In particular, the Western worldview that has become so pervasive in our globalized world is in fact at the root of the ecological degradation and environmental exploitation that has so damaged the earth. As a corrective to these unsustainable ways, Earthkeepers is committed to seeking out and sharing wisdom and insights from Indigenous cultures from all parts of the world. To that end, we invite you to learn with us and to take to heart the wisdom offered by people like Lenore Three Stars. Your words have power. They have corrective power. They have inspiration power. So when you say things like, we need to be the best relation we can be, there's just a lot of weight to those words. And part of it, I think, is I know I need to hear that. I need answers and alternatives to ways of thinking that I know are incomplete. But I also think that the church as a whole is crying out for something different, some different way forward, because as you pointed out, look where the old way of thinking has gotten us. Our way forward is not sustainable. There must be a different way of understanding.
I don't think that's going to come from me. I think it's going to come from creation. Creation is going to speak up and say, you are not creating a world in which you can sustain yourself. Creation doesn't need us to continue. We need creation. So I feel that the final word, the convincing word, is not going to come from people like me. Creation has a voice, and we're hearing it little by little. Whether we're ignoring it to our own detriment is up to us.
So one of the things I have learned a lot about from you and other Native scholars is this understanding of a theology of the land. And I'm wondering if you could tell us some things that you teach and write about that subject.
Our creation stories tell us that where we're created, that there is a specific place that we are responsible to. And we're supposed to take care of that place the same way that it took care of us for millennia, way before there were any political considerations. That is not a portable spiritual relationship where the Lakota, Black Hills, or Hesapa is included in our ancestral territories. Even today, there are people who are doing ceremony for a restoration of right relationship between the people and creation and creator.
When you feel discouraged or even have some despair about what we see in terms of environmental degradation, where do you find your hope?
For me, I find it in Creator Jesus. And when I say Creator Jesus, when I say Creator, I do mean Jesus, because whether you consider it the creation force in Lakota theology that doesn't have a gender, or whether I experienced it after all these years in Jesus, and now that's just how I relate to it, creation. I have to say that I became convinced that Jesus is who he says he is, that he did what he said he did. And that includes, in this whole hoop of life, that includes the time when restoration will happen. For me, it's here. That whole dualism of heaven and earth, that's not an Indigenous worldview. It's here now. The spiritual realm is just all around us. There's no disconnect. So I feel the hoop of life will come around again to restoration. And that is not just for me and my Tioshbaye, for all our relatives, human and non-human. Jesus showed us what that perfect love looked like, and we killed him for it. But I do believe, as in our own stories, Lakota stories, that is the white buffalo calf woman. She's coming back. All of this is going to come back again. And we'll see. We'll find out. But I have enough faith that restoration, that shalom, that healing, that salvation, that it's real, that sustains me.
I think in the Western Christian tradition, we tend to have boiled it all down to a certain number of key stories that then determine all of theology, all of worldview. And when I hear you talk, I hear you making references to different characters and different moments of history. It seems to me that your faith has a richer tradition of stories. It's as if you've expanded the realm of possibility in terms of the stories that inform how you think about Jesus, how you think about culture, how you think about the earth. I'm wondering, first of all, if you think that's true. And second, how does that actually work? How have you recovered the stories that rightfully belong to you and to your people? And how does that make a difference in how you connect to Jesus or to the earth?
Well, a lot of times I've talked to my mom about what I was learning and how I was learning it. And she'll think about it and she'll say, Well, that's what we thought too. We just didn't have that kind of language for it. So more and more I'm getting to hear from my mom, but she comes from a time in history when they didn't teach. They were not able to teach. In fact, the spiritual traditions, they had to go underground because it was illegal to practice any kind of native spirituality. So you had to either do it in a way that the government didn't know that it was spiritual tradition, or it just totally went underground. I've read so many good books. Albert Whitehead is a good author. He's a Shichango from Rosebud, South Dakota. So that he explains that whole time, and it helped me understand my mother, how she was, the consequence for her was that she didn't get that full experience. But then later she knew enough that she could say, oh, that must have been this or that. And so I was able to share with her, and she was able to share with me. And then, of course, I have aunties and uncles. And it's interesting how this all comes in. The story is that's just the worldview. I mean, I know the Western worldview is that it should be in writing. It should be to be literate, is the ultimate value. But oral tradition, the New Testament was oral tradition right before anybody wrote it down. So Indigenous value of oral tradition is not congruous with the Western tradition of literacy. But for us, it has sustained us. Well, I like to credit Randy Woodley, Dr. Woodley, from my Indigenous studies. He helped me understand a lot about worldview, and I would recommend his book, Shalom in the Community of Creation, for quite a bit of helping me understand the confusion and the dissonance, in my life.
Do you feel comfortable sharing any story that contains an element of this worldview that you were sharing about?
One story that I like to share is that Heyapi, which means it is said that in the early days, the people would eat the buffalo, but the buffalo would eat the people too. Ew. It was a terrible time of disharmony. Creator heard the prayers of the people, and he told Crow to tell all creation to bring their best runners for a great race around Hesapa. Now, if the two-legged won, the buffalo would no longer eat the people. Yay! But if the four-legged won, the buffalo would continue to eat the people. Ew. So all of creation participated. The birds with two legs were on the side of the people. The race was grueling. It lasted for days and days, and it was so hot. Many racers stumbled and fell, and many had to drop out from utter exhaustion. And of course, there were those who wandered off for a cool swim and a night-long nap. In the end, the people's best runner looked to be no match for the strong young buffalo cow. Magpie, who was one of the slowest flyers, had been resting on the back of the buffalo. Suddenly, she flew up towards the sun, and that's how she got her glistening feathers. Then she swooped across the finish line just ahead of the young buffalo. Yay! So the Buffalo Nation agreed that it was a good race, and they would give their life so the people could eat and live. And the people agreed that they would treat the buffalo with respect as relatives when they needed to eat them, and they would not take more than they needed. And I like to share that the meaning of this story is that we all started out, Creator provided a perfect place for harmony and right relationship to flourish, whether it was in the garden or at Hesapa. All was in right relationship, and then harmony was broken. That was symbolized by the buffalo eating the people, ew, and the people failing to treat the Buffalo Nation as relatives with respect. So Creator could have simply said, here's what you're going to do, here's the just outcome. But he didn't do that. He didn't do his work for them. We see that the humans did not assume control of the process. The entirety, the whole creation, the community of creation participated, even the smallest and slowest flyer. This was a race for healing to restore balance and harmony. And once the process was completed, all agreed to uphold those values of sacrifice, generosity, humility, and respect. They all sought to be the best relatives they could be. So from a Lakota perspective, it's not about a linear orthodoxy of someday, this is going to happen. It's about a continuous orthopraxy, always practicing, always trying to be the best relative you can be.
So practically speaking, how do people actually live out that difference of perspective, that different way of thinking? What does it mean actually to think in terms of community and kinship?
Well, I think Jesus told us to put the consideration of others, the interests of others above your own. His idea was that the first shall be last and the last shall be first. I don't think this is anything new. It's just that we don't do it.
And in terms of relationship to the earth, what does that mean?
Well, like I say, I'm not going to have the last word on that. But I think for us to not consider ourselves as related to the earth, the way that the word tells us Adam was, right? He was made from Adama, the earth. I don't think that's a lot different. I don't think that's much different from the Lakota creation story that says we emerged from the earth. We all are relatives because the creation force created each bit of creation using its blood, thereby making us all relatives. I don't know how you convince anybody of having the right worldview unless you're willing to put the interests of others ahead of your own.
Thinking about the audience, you have to, I think, assume that most people are in that place of wanting to think differently. They're in a place of not having to be convinced that there is a different way, even if they don't know what that different way looks like. I'm just wondering if thinking about them, thinking about our listeners, what else would you say to them, either to challenge them or to encourage them?
Well, I know that the Western response is always, what do we do then? What do we do? But I don't think it always goes to doing. I think it goes to seeing. What do you see? Once you see what the right way of relationship is, I think the doing comes after that.
I wonder, and this really is a point of curiosity, given where you've come from, where you're going, your own story, how does your involvement with Circlewood fit into this? Like, what are you doing? Why Circlewood? Why are you choosing to invest yourself in that?
Well, when I was first invited onto the Circlewood board, I was able to understand enough that Circlewood wants to bring creation back into discipleship, which is not anything that I ever got. When I became a believer, the only thing I learned was that for God so loved the world meant that now that I said that prayer, I'm not going to hell. That is a dualism that definitely doesn't teach you everything that you need to know. So the fuller expression of discipleship has to do very much to do with creation. You can't have God without creation. So I understood that Circlewood is intentional about discipleship, including a love for creation, because man doesn't care for creation the way Creator does, but we should. So I wanted to be a part of anything that was moving that way from Christianity, because I don't follow Christianity, I just follow Jesus, the personhood of Jesus. And I think it was unfortunate that for so many years I didn't understand. I understood that I was uncomfortable in Christianity, but I didn't understand why. But now that I do, and Circlewood seems to me to be a part of broadening the expression of God's love. I would like to see more of that happen.
Circlewood is a community of people who believe that love and care for creation is a core part of the practice of faith, which is a very new idea for many people.
Mm-hmm.
And like you, I hope that it continues. Yeah. I hope that we can help people to, I think, feel some freedom to believe that, because as you pointed out, historically, we not only don't get taught a theology of creation that's more inclusive, but I think the idea that salvation, restoration includes the whole of creation is something that's actively discouraged, really, by Western Christian teaching. And so, understandably, there's a lot of hesitation and I think fear on some people's part to actually dare to believe that it could be different. So I see my involvement in Circlewood as giving people permission to actually act on what they already know. I think in their heart of hearts, they know that it's different, that it can't be this very narrow understanding of our relationship to the earth that we've been taught for so long.
Yeah, Circlewood feels to me more of a move towards an Indigenous worldview. It has room for an Indigenous voice, which I very much appreciate. I'm hopeful.
We've been talking with Lenore Three Stars, member of the Circlewood board. If you would like to know more about topics we've mentioned in this conversation, you'll find helpful links and resources in this episode's notes section. Earthkeepers podcast explores ways in which we can change ourselves, our communities, and our cultures to help us to care for the earth in holistic and regenerative ways. Through curated conversations, we highlight the wisdom of thought leaders and change agents who are making a difference and showing us a way forward. When Earthkeepers stand together, they amplify the impact of their resistance against environmental injustice and multiply their efforts for renewal and restoration. We invite you to support us by becoming a subscriber. You can help us reach more people with our message by leaving a positive review on Apple Podcasts. And please, share Earthkeepers podcast with anyone you know who seeks a better relationship to the earth. This podcast is an expression of Circlewood, an organization whose purpose it is to cultivate transformative communities that love and care for all creation. If you'd like to learn more about the Circlewood community, please visit our website at www.circlewood.online or write to us at podcast@circlewood.online. I'm Forrest Tinsley, your podcast host. Our executive producer is James Amadon. Forrest Reed is our sound engineer and the creator of our original music. Our research assistant is Rochelle Nordman. Thank you, friends, for listening. And please join us for our next conversation on the Earthkeepers podcast.